Sweet, so just a little background on my lecture. It's going to be in Biology 30, Unit D, which is Population Dynamics. This is kind of like the second lecture, or maybe third, they've been into this. So you kind of already know what an ecosystem is, you kind of know who's playing in an ecosystem, and specifically today we're going to go into the interactions. Kind of for the whole lesson plan, most of this is just direct lecture for the Bio 30. There's like room for discussion and questions, but no specific activity tied into this. And then the rest of the class afterwards is like a whole 40-minute activity built around these interactions where students would like each get assigned one and then they would have to like act it out in front of the class, so I don't get to see the different ones. But I will start it in with this. So, good morning class, we're continuing on with our talk on ecosystems and the interactions that go on within ecosystems. So a brief overview of what we kind of covered last time with what is an ecosystem. It's kind of like a geographic area where both biotic, living, and abiotic, which would be the non-living, factors interact to kind of create the bubble of life. So really important when we're talking about biology, we're looking through things with an evolutionary lens. That's how everything's been built up. It's through this long period of time. So all the changes we talk about these interactions, they're kind of like really long period things that's happening. We're talking times of generation times, like thousands of years. So a lot of these species have been interacting together for a long time. This map is pretty idealized of the habitat in Alberta. We have human impacted a lot of this, but these are kind of the general biomes we see. And each of those biomes would have different species and different interactions taking place within them. So you might be thinking like kind of what are those interactions we'll be looking at today? And they fall into like two broad categories, interspecific and intraspecific. So if we're breaking down the words, inter, between specific species, interspecific, between two species. Kind of illustrated up here, we have like both lion, cheetah, or jaguar, whatever that one is, fighting over this gazelle. Two different species fighting for the same, either food source or maybe like habitat. And that's compared to intra, with intra being within, so within one species. Interactions happening between members of the same species. It would have been great if these were the same monkey, but we can picture them as the same. Maybe they're fighting over, those are bananas, they're fighting over access to mates, access to breeding grounds, or maybe they could also be helping each other out. Not all interactions will be like negative ones, we have positive ones we'll see later on as well. But we're going to start with some of the ones that may seem negative. I guess one of the common misconceptions kind of around these interactions, we can't be applying like human morals to animals. We're rational agents when they can't think in like a term of a long-term moral process. This is all just natural to them. So there's really no good guys, bad guys here. There's just nature interacting. But an important part with these interactions is how they're affecting populations as a whole. So a lot of the time the shorthand for this will just show a dash with either plus minus, plus plus kind of stuff, representing one species versus the other. So the first interaction we're looking at is predation. A lot of you have probably heard of this before, and the image in your head is probably correct. It's when one organism kills and eats another organism. So if we're looking in terms of population dynamics, the organism that's getting resources, they're winning there. You can live longer, better chance to pass off your genes. That's beneficial for you and your population. Most of the time, in a general sense, getting eaten isn't great. You're not going to be able to pass on your genetic information. We could see interactions where predators prevent prey populations from growing too large and diminishing their resources. But in a general term, we kind of refer to predation as predators are gaining while prey are losing. If any of you are going to continue on into biology afterwards, you will definitely see this graph. It's a very famous one, kind of looking at the lynx and snowshoe hare relationship. So does anybody want to take a couple seconds to interpret this or kind of make an interpretation of what's kind of going on in this graph here? If this is a little bad to read, your blue or white color here is your lynxes and hare is red. Yeah, Jordan.
What we call it is the hare population grows and the lynx population grows, but then as it also declines and it also declines at the same time.
Do you think they're growing at like the same time, or are they different times, maybe offset a bit, or?
They kind of offset, but near the end, look kind of like they're overlapping, but at the beginning not so much.
Yeah, so we kind of see like here we have a high population of predator and really low prey. So if you put yourself in that situation, not as much food, a lot of competition happening between your species for that food, so that's going to cause a decline there. But then as less predators are coming, prey have a better chance of surviving, and then we kind of get that offset where they've now created this cycle. We call that lag time. It's kind of like if you didn't eat today, like if I miss my lunch, I'm not dead like that. I have some time to get it. So with a lot of biological processes, we see a bit of a lag time happening. Anyone want to take a look at this X-axis, anything cool you see about this? Might not be super obvious. It's a really long time, eh? Like 1884 to 1925. How do you think we collected data for like almost over 100 years? Like, is that one person on the field from the day they were born to the day they died counting these populations, or how do you think we got that data? Any guesses? Or
So like a research team?
closer, it would have been a team putting this all. These are, we call, like, this would be an indirect data. Most of the stuff we looked at in the past would be. This research paper would have started well beyond these times, and we got this data from the Hudson Bay company and their fur pelts. So it's not a direct measure of populations. That's going to be one of the hardest things ever to do, is direct measure of population. You can't census elk, they're not going to answer. So you have to use an indirect method, and it's pelts. So we look here, you have a lot of rabbit pelts coming in. Chances are the rabbit population's bigger. If you're not getting any rabbit pelts, chances are there's not a lot of rabbits around. So that's kind of these ones, and that would be predation. Next we're going to switch on to competition. So I kind of was briefly mentioning it within predation, but it's where we have two organisms competing for a shared resource. Could be intra or interspecific. You could be fighting with, brother and kin for sources, or you could be fighting for the same prey source with another species. Two kind of broad categories. For this class and like testing, these categories aren't super important, just more for your own knowledge, but interference can be preventing access. Great example of this is elephant seals. They're harem breeders, so kind of like your top 4 males just get all the women and then everyone else gets none of them. And the way they keep their harem is by fighting and preventing access to them. So the smaller males just don't get the chance because they're being interfered with. Exploitative is if we're fighting with the same limited resource. If we look back at our hair graph, if there's not a lot of rabbits, those lynx are going to have to be fighting with each other for access to those so they can survive. But those prey just don't have to take it, like you're not just hopeless in the matter. And since, again, we look at ecosystems through an evolutionary mindset, they're going to have predation being a selective pressure on them. So that's going to allow them to kind of slowly adapt to changes in that. So 3 broad categories: behavioral, morphological, chemical. We're going to start with behavioral, changing what you do. If your predator is always out there in the day, slowly you could shift to not being out there in the day and just avoiding them. That's one of the best mechanisms. If you're not interacting with your predator, it's going to be pretty hard for them to eat you. You can also do like warning calls. If you're in a big herd, eating's pretty dangerous. If any of you are those people who eat and like they need to be watching a TV, you're not really zoned in your surroundings, so a predator can come up to you. So in big herds, sometimes they'll have ones just being like, hey, a predator's approaching, so everybody can be aware. Playing dead's also one you've maybe seen like opossums do that. Not many things like to eat dead, decaying things. Morphological, you can change your body. You can get spikes, you can change your size. If you're bigger than your predator, they're not going to really be able to eat you or have a harder time. You can have a strong exoskeleton. We're going to look at mimicry later on a different slide. But going to protective coverings, this is a native species in Alberta that I just figured out like 2 weeks ago that porcupines are here. I'm new to this land, and that's like blew my mind that porcupines were here. I like drove to go see it when someone reported it to me, so super cool they're there. It's gonna be really hard to eat something if it's spiking you up, right? Like, that's gonna be hard. And then if we look at chemical, you can also just make yourself not tasty to predators, or even deadly. And remember, through an evolutionary time, if one species is like, if a predator is only eating one and then dying, that kind of behavior is not gonna be passed on because you're not living to pass it on. But again, not all interactions in the ecosystem are negative. That just have like death and stuff. Oh, right, my memory side. Back to mimicry. So mimicry, you're acting as somebody else. And there's kind of like 2 different forms. Batesian is where a harmless species shares the appearance of a harmful one. So we have a king snake and a violet snake here. Both of this guy here, non-venomous, but this one's venomous. At first glance, if you know a red, yellow, and black snake is venomous, you're probably not going to take the chance to play with this one. The odds are it could be venomous as well, same banding pattern. That's kind of the idea with this one. Or with Malarian, both of the species just are toxic or not useful or bad to the predator, and they share kind of the banding patterns. We see this a lot with bright colors in nature. That's usually kind of an indicator, generally, that there's maybe some poison going on or bad things. So the monarch and the viceroy ornaments, this is a cool example because when it was taught to me as Batesian, but research actually showed it would be Malarian because both of these species are actually toxic to the predators. a cool little research way they found that out is they just moved the wings and just left the body, so there wasn't that coloration, and they found the predators still didn't like to eat any of them. But going on yet, not every interaction in the ecosystem is going to be negative. We do have times where things help each other out. And there's going to be like symbiotic relationships for the most part. Breaking down this word, it's just like a relationship that's happened over a long time from two species or more that live in close proximity to each other. And the first one we'll look at is mutualism. So if we break it down, mutual or mutus being mutual or reciprocal, ism is just kind of an ending for like a practice. So it's a mutual practice or it's reciprocal. Both of these species are gaining from this. My favorite example, it has to be ants and aphids. If you don't know much about aphids, they're just sapsuckers. They are pulling kind of like the phloem out of plants, and that's really high in sugar and low in protein, but you need your protein. So they have to excrete a lot of sugar to get the protein they need. Ants love sugar, so they're going to come and basically like suck the excrement out of them or pull it off of them. And what the aphids get back from this is protection. We, again, shouldn't be putting like human characteristics on animals. I'll break that rule in this case. Aphids aren't smart. They are like clueless insects. You can have a predator right beside them and they won't do much. So what these ants do is provide protection to them. It's called like ant farming for a lot of them, that the ants protect these aphids because the aphids are providing them with something. And the aphids also get the benefit of protection. Mycelium in trees is another good one. Mushrooms have those big underground networks of mycelium that help tree roots uptake like nutrients like nitrogen, and then in return the mushrooms get a little bit of sugar as well, which is more hard for them to take. Commensalism is where one species benefits and the other one doesn't really gain or harm. The word breakdown for this one doesn't work that great. It's like sharing a table, which is kind of hard to see how one wins and the other doesn't. But if we think about the cows and the egrets, cows here just graze on their field, they do what they do, but while they're doing this, they're disrupting insects, kind of like worms as well, and flies in the ground. So the egret just get all those insects much easier, so they get benefit from that. I also have a picture here of bristles. Anyone want to, or like thorns or burrs? Anyone want to kind of take a guess on why this would be considered a commensal relationship? Yeah.
Do they stick to animals? And
Yeah.
animals just bring them around?
Yeah, exactly. So these might seem really negative to us. If you get one on these, you wouldn't think that's just neutral. But for like a big bear, it's not going to notice when this is like on its leg, and it gets to carry that seed away. And if we think back to competition, why might it be good for this plant to get its seeds way away from it?
It doesn't have to like share.
Yeah, exactly. If these fall right below the plant, this is kind of be some intra-specific competition here. Now your kids are growing up in that same place that you are, like right beside you, and now you're fighting them for the same resources, and that's not really beneficial for you. So if you can spread them out, that's great. And if an animal can do it for free for you, that's even better. But we do have some negative ones as well, where some win, some lose. Parasitism is going to be one of the big ones. Break it down. Para is beside or next to. It's either being food, so you're beside your food, or you're next to your food, or in a lot of cases of parasite, within your food. So there's this relationship where one organism lives inside the other one. The parasite benefits from stealing nutrients, and the host loses those nutrients, so it usually suffers. The goal is not to kill your host. That's like a free food source for you. It's really bad if that dies, but you do cause it harm. Tongue-eating louse is a cool one of those. It enters through fish's gills, cuts off the circulation in their tongue, and then just replaces their tongue for them. You can actually, like sometimes in fish markets, find them with the louse in there, which is pretty cool, or bad, depending on your interpretation of it. This next interaction isn't one of the program studies, but as an entomology major, it is super cool. It's parasitoidism. This one, you are trying to kill your host. You're basically, majority of it is parasitoid wasps, a little bit of flies and nematodes do it too, but you're laying your egg inside your host. Your egg's going to hatch and then eat out your host. So this is a dead caterpillar with a bunch of larvae pupating, turning into their adult form on top of the host. So they've eaten this guy out from the inside out, and they're ready to go on their next stage, and unfortunately the caterpillar is not. These are just a quick summary for your own study guide that kind of breaks it down, looking at the populations. And just in that last little bit, I have a picture here of a really good hunter. This is not her specifically, but cats in general are like really good hunters. So I want you to kind of think about what happens when a predator is introduced to an ecosystem. So take about like 30 seconds to kind of think that through of like what the ramifications of that would be, how does that affect population dynamics, and then also if you finish kind of through that and you have time, think about what you would classify the relationship of a human and a cat together. Is that parasite? Is that mutualism? Is that commensalism? Is competition maybe? So yeah, I'll give you 30 seconds to think that through and then we'll call up some class answers. I'm going to do it that way, so I'm just going to watch the time.
Sure. So relationship between the cat and human, and what's the other question?
And then like how will it affect ecosystem dynamics if we add a predator to it? And like I will say this is a very general predator. It's not one of those evolutionary ties where it only will eat one thing. Cats kill anything in their path that they can. They're very opportunistic.
So I guess to answer the question.
I'll call on it. I was going to give like 30 seconds for my wait
Oh,
time
okay.
thing.
I'm sorry.
But that kind of was the 30 seconds, so if anyone has their answer and wants to share to either of those questions.
I'd say like the second part, like mutualism, because like maybe like the emotional part, and then the cat is just getting like food from you.
Yeah, for sure. So did everyone agree that like the cat would be getting a benefit living with someone? For sure. So like the cat gets all of its food and its needs covered. It doesn't have to worry about anything else in life, right? And then yeah, I would agree in my case, she provides great emotional support, so positive. She could also be, some would consider a parasite. They're a little expensive, they're draining your finances. You could see it that way. Or it could just be neutral. It could just be someone living in your house. So sometimes these dynamics are a little case specific and change through ecosystems, but I would agree that this would be mutualistic. And then just very quickly, anyone wanting to talk about what happens when we add predators into populations?
Isn't invasive species kind of the same thing?
Yeah, it would be very similar to invasive species. So if we think about it in terms of like competition, you now have this hunter who's an amazing hunter. So now there's so much more competition for all of our other predators. Our prey have to deal with so much more. So now they're usually reducing their numbers, which can in turn reduce predator numbers, and it can throw your whole ecosystem out of whack. It's very important you keep your cats indoors. They kill, like, in Australia, like 40% of rat extinctions or mice kind of underground are due to cats and foxes that were introduced. So keep your cats indoors, and that is my end of my presentation.